When the chips are down, the American people are going to show up, just like those kids did 80 years ago. We have to stand in the breach just like those men and women did. We have to fight democracy wherever we find it.
The same resolve that the extraordinary men and women that we're celebrating today showed then, he's showing now. The President's determined to make sure we're standing up today just as they stood up 80 years ago. You know, there's a really powerful parallel, too, between what we're commemorating today and what we're doing now.
Today we start with a new propaganda narrative. This came after Biden headed over to France for the D-Day ceremony. In what clearly was a coordinated propaganda message, administration and campaign officials are now comparing Joe Biden stopping Donald Trump to storming the beaches of Normandy.
On June 6, 1944, 80 years ago, 75,000 men and women, mostly an American force, but joined by 12 other nations, saved the world and protected freedom. They gave their last full measure because they were defending freedom and democracy. And I think the president has said many, many times, and he took this occasion because America is, in fact, an indispensable nation. It is the nation that has kept the NATO alliance together, that, in fact, we have to continue to do the things that we have done in the past to preserve freedom, because freedom isn't free. We can't take it for granted. And when we do, and we have to defend it, the price is usually paid by the blood of young men and women. And the president is, again, making a clarion call, not only to the people of America, but to the people of the world, that authoritarianism is on the rise. And we have to stand in the breach just like those men and women did. It's just really a very, very, very somber reminder that we have to fight democracy wherever we find it. And the president has been very clear about this. He thinks, and I agree with him, as do most American people, that we're seeing the gravest threat to American democracy on our own land that we have seen in the history of the country. And Donald Trump is that threat. I must say, for people who say, well, how's Biden doing? And he says, watch me. I think everybody would agree that the president represented the United States of America very, very well. Red states, blue states, I represent everybody, whether they voted for me or not. That's Joe Biden's character. Donald Trump's character is, if you're not my friend, then you're my enemy, and I'm not going to help you. And I feel very, very confident that this is going to be a very hard-fought race, but when the chips are down, the American people are going to show up, just like those kids did 80 years ago.
What should our allies and enemies take away from the president's speech this morning in Normandy?
The same resolve that the extraordinary men and women that we're celebrating today showed then, he's showing now. Because they did what they did, we're here today, and we not only have a responsibility to honor what they did, but the real way to honor it is to make sure that we're good in our time, in our moment, in standing up to the challenges that we face. And one of those we see now is aggression from Russia, not only against Ukraine, but against the very principles at the heart of the international system that were put in place after World War II to try to make sure that we didn't have another world war, that we maintain peace and security. And the president's determined to make sure we're standing up today just as they stood up 80 years ago.
The president did say that the support for Ukraine would continue, that we will be there for Ukraine. How does that parallel with some of the reticence we have seen in Washington that actually delayed the much-needed aid Ukraine needed to push back against Russian aggression?
Well, you know, Mika, that aid should have gotten there a long time ago, but I'm glad it's there now, and it's making a difference. Every single day, we're pushing it out to the front lines, making sure the Ukrainians who need it against this Russian aggression have it and can use it. But, you know, there's a really powerful parallel, too, between what we're commemorating today and what we're doing now.
As far as the ceremony itself, in typical Biden fashion, he looked like he had absolutely no idea what was going on. He, too, compared his supposed fight for democracy to the World War II time period. And he celebrated the killing of Russians, even including the government-cited number as far as how many have been killed.
We're living in a time when democracy is more at risk across the world than any point since the end of World War II, since these beaches were stormed. They've inflicted on the Russian aggressors, they've suffered tremendous losses, Russia. The numbers are staggering. 350,000 Russian troops dead or wounded.
au-dessus de nos têtes les énormes obus de nos navires de guerre. Certains de ces
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin.
Now walking next to Joe Biden there is French President Emmanuel Macron, and that's his wife on the other end with Jill Biden. If you've never heard the story about how they met, it's absolutely insane. In general, she's 25 years older than him, which is obviously not the norm, but what makes the story extra weird is that she was 40 years old and he was 15 when they met. And on top of that, she was his teacher at the time. They even went as far to come up with a lie that he was dating her daughter. When Macron's parents found out, they went to her and asked her to stop seeing him until he was of an adult age, and according to them, she said she could not make any promises. So I would imagine her and Joe Biden get along very well.
She was 40 at the time, married, and a teacher. He was just 15 and her student, right, 25-year gap. Now, in Australia, she would risk jail time, to be honest, but she says, oh, well, my head was in a mess. For me, such a young boy was crippling, so it's all about her. She was in a terrible mess and blah, blah. Well, should it matter now, Esther, that years down the track, and they seem happily married, obsessively, apparently I read the other day that they barely go 90 minutes of a day without talking to each other, that a woman of 40 had a relationship with a 15-year-old student?
I mean, it should matter because we know what would happen if the roles were reversed, or more accurately, if the genders were reversed. If you had a 40-year-old man married with 3 children falling for his student and a classmate of one of his children who's the age of 15, you know the media speculation around that would be terrible. We know that the age of consent in France is actually 15, so she's been very fortunate, or should I say lucky, in that regard. But it's just creepy, it's strange, and we obviously know that there are double standards going on here.
Lastly, Joe Biden was asked about slowly marching us towards World War III. Specifically, he was asked about how American weapons are now being used to attack Russia in Russia, and he said no big deal because they're not bombing Moscow or the Kremlin.
I know for years you've resisted the idea of American weapons being used for any sort of direct strike inside Russia. But we did witness this shift in recent days, authorizing American weapons for limited direct strikes. Are American weapons being used right now inside Russia?
They're authorized to be used in proximity to the border. We're not authorizing strikes 200 miles into Russia. We're not authorizing strikes on Moscow, on the Kremlin.
The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III.